What started me into that is I have a.
This was a great round table discussion. We had three experts up there that are so knowledgeable about the history of turkey calls, and Mr. Ellis helping finance this and provide this. I loved every minute of it because I'm a collector, and it was just so much information. And then I'm gonna love this book. I bought a couple of them, and I just appreciate all their efforts and time because it took thousands of hours, I can assure you.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
My butt was in a picture.
Yeah, that's good, man. That's gonna be the thumbnail. Right there in Rick's face.
Good. You look better.
That's right. Brent, I can't make you look any better, man.
Nobody can. Are you good?
You're good. Whenever you're ready, just ask everybody how the sound,
Good evening. Can those in the back hear okay?
Yes.
Great. There's plenty of seats up here if you can. Thanks for joining us tonight. Instead of watching football, I guess it'll still be going when we get done. So, we wrote a book on turkey call history, which we neglected to bring with us. So, Rick's wife Linda's grabbing one just so you can see it. We'll have it upstairs again tomorrow. But everybody is here because we have a shared passion. Clearly, where we came from is part of what binds us together. There's a lot of appreciation, whether you're a call maker, a collector, a hunter. That past history we have is a shared, really a shared thing that all of us want to celebrate. So I'm Brent Rogers. I'm from Iowa, and I worked on this project with three other gentlemen. Danny Ellis is not here tonight. We'll talk about him in a little bit. But what we'll do, I think most of you know us, but we'll introduce ourselves, and we'll let the other guys as well tell you where they're from, and then talk about maybe a favorite call featured in our new book before we really dive into it. So for me, my favorite call that we featured in the book was the Charles Jordan Yelper. I really have a lot of respect for a guy in the late 1800s that was pioneering turkey management in terms of the property he managed, was a photographer. Right after Kodak came out, he was taking pictures. He studied turkey language. He was a call maker. He shared that knowledge through magazine articles. Eventually his writings got published by Edward McElhaney. And the call that Danny Ellis has, that has the ferrule inscribed to his friend John K. Renault from him, that is a gem of turkey call history. And that's something that was just my favorite call in the book.
Okay, I'm Rick Powell. I know most of you have been coming to Unicoi now for probably 25 some years. Started out hunting and fishing, and when I was hunting, I thought, it'd be neat to try and make something that will fool Mother Nature and make something with my hands and take a turkey that I played with a call that I made, and started making calls and got to know a lot of people in this room during that time. And as I started making calls, I started getting more and more interested in how calls were made. Not just how today's calls are made, but what started people into making calls? How did they do it? And when it started, people didn't start to make the most unique or most special or most different. An important part is people started making calls for one purpose: to kill a turkey. And that's all they had in mind. They wanted to kill a turkey. Now, there was different seasons and different voices, but the one call to me that was the most special, and I grew up in Virginia, it's a Virginia call. It was made by Dr. Wade Hampton Saunders. He made the call out of Roanoke, Virginia. It's a pretty simple peg and slate call, and that's just going back to my heritage in Virginia. That's the call that I really like.
My name is Chris McDonald. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and My experience in turkey call collecting goes back about 50 years. One of my best friends, who is not doing too well right now, Howard Harlan, I think you're all probably very familiar with his name and his impact on turkey call collecting from his book, 1994. I helped him with that book, obviously helped on this book, but I think my favorite call of the ones in the book, and it's very, very difficult to pin those down because they're all great calls, is probably the gobble box that was made by M.L. Lynch in the late 40s from Homewood, Alabama. Obviously, everybody knows Lynch and his Birmingham calls. Well, Homewood is Birmingham. It was just named Homewood at the time instead of being incorporated into Birmingham. But to our knowledge, it's the only drilled out box. It's not saw and glue like we know of all the Lynch calls. It's this particular call here. There are very, very few Homewood calls, but we think this is one of the earlier calls. But my experience in the call collecting business, I've obviously made a little slate call or a wing bone call like most of us have, but I'm not a call maker, but I sure love them. I've got so many, just like all of you probably in this room do, I know on this panel for sure, but I've been doing appraisals for both individual estates and for the NWTF for the last 16 years. I did appraisals before then, but I talked them into doing that kind of as an antique road show for turkey calls because we just love the history. But that's my 2 cents.
And after we're done, we'll have a time where you can all ask questions toward the end, and then you're welcome to come up and look at the calls if you've got questions or anything, that'd be great. So I think we all realize that we're continuously losing our history. We think about those that sat in these seats that aren't here to do that anymore. Just since last year, Tony Carino and Steve Savage, and Cat Sharp, who was a big part of this family, right? We've had others that were extended part of the call making community, Winky Hicks, Jake McCormick out of Eminence, Kip Feroci, the Ferocious calls out of Pennsylvania. I'm not sure, did I pronounce his last name right? Feroci. And Gene Upward, Wisconsin. I mean, there may be others, but the knowledge of call making being passed down from person to person, that's a big part of how it's done. And the stories that go with that are also part of our verbal history. And a lot of that doesn't get captured well. And when the seats are empty, the stories are lost and the knowledge is gone, unless there's a really diligent way to pass that along. And that's what inspired us to do what we did. All of us really liked what Howard Harlan did in his 1994 book. And we felt like there was room to, with tools we now have at our disposal, to go even further. So that's what we did. We dove deep over 2 years, interviewing, researching online. Internet was a huge help to do that, to really dig back into some of that foundational history. And I'd like to say that this is 3 of the 4 of us that were part of the book project. I mentioned Danny Ellis wasn't able to make it due to a family commitment, and I would just like to say that the 3 of us, as well as all of you, owe Danny a huge debt of gratitude for making this project possible, because he is a very special collector in his willingness to share what he has and find a way to help pass that on. Josh, what you do, what Val Espinosa does, there's some of you do podcasts. Those are all such great ways to also capture it. What we want to do with the book is really dig back into the deep history. Here's how we got where we are. And so Danny really funded this project. There were many others involved as well. So the 4 of us were authors, but Amy Berryhill was such a great help in terms of we had 3 photographers we used to do take all the photos of the calls. but I don't know how the heck to format that into a book format, but I know somebody that does, and she did a fantastic job cleaning up things and getting it ready. And Jeff D'Agostino, the art you did, I think, you know, we look at old art and it evokes a different emotion, art does sometimes, than photos. And so that gave us an ability to do that with the book. And, you know, just really appreciated everybody that contributed. Many of you in this room are people we interviewed. We used some of your calls and photographs. You helped tell us stories. So this was a big community effort. I really want to start the conversation about the turkey call history with this project specifically, what kind of got it off the ground. So Chris and Rick, I know both of you, as well as Lamar, there maybe were others in the room that want to tell us kind of how did this specific project get started?
This all started, I think, this is my recollection, and I'm getting a little older, so my memory's not what it used to be, but about 10 years ago, Danny Ellis asked me to write a book. And I said, Danny, I can't write a book. He said, but you've got to. He said, you've got too much knowledge that I'm afraid we're going to lose, knowing I'm getting older. And he said it needs to be pen to paper to get that out. It's knowledge that, you know, I've been collecting turkey calls for over 50 years. And I've had the wonderful opportunity to travel this whole country, Mexico, hunting turkey, but meeting people. And people have asked me for years, you know, why do you collect turkey calls with such vigor and desire? And I said, it's an extension of my turkey hunting season. I'm hunting turkeys and I'm hunting calls. And the history of that all has a huge meaning for me. And I hope it does for you too. But Danny lit the fire, and we were fortunate enough to meet Brent. And we met you 4 years ago. And we were familiar with his writings and his absolute passion for what we do as collectors. And it basically came together that we were able to do that. And it started really a little over 2 years ago. It was 3 years ago when we met, wasn't it? We met in Charlotte, Lamar Williams, Howard Harland, Rick Powell, Danny and I, to start this, but we never could really get it off the ground until Brent became the catalyst to make it work.
Chris hit on most of it, and I think that the one thing that I would reiterate is this really is a passion project from Danny. He brought it up 10, 12 years ago. We talked about it almost every year after that. Those of you, and I know probably most everybody in this room knows Danny, he's like a dog on a bone. He doesn't let anything go. When he gets in his mind he's going to do it, he's going to do it. So we kept on, we need to do this. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? And then, like Chris said, at the time we got Lamar and myself and Howard, and went to Danny's house, and he videotaped that and said, here's some of the questions, here's what we need to talk about. And then we met Brent and said, because we talked about who was going to write it, because none of us felt confident enough to be the author of it. And when we got to know Brent, we said, we know who that person is. And I'm going to ask Lamar if you want to add to that any, because you were a part of this.
You taking my mic, Josh?
I got it.
I think everybody hear me? Look, when we all came together for that first meeting in Charlotte, at Danny's, I think if I'm not mistaken, we met for 2 days. I think they came up with Danny came up with 12 hours of recording, something along those lines. And I can tell you right now, I contributed very little to that time that we spent there. Because I think I was there primarily to maybe speak to what I knew about Bill Cost. And of course, he's in the book. There's a book written on that as well, as y'all know, Berry Hill Publishers. But anyway, that was my part in it, but it was just a great time to get together with these guys because those guys right there, and Danny included, they're the cream of the crop when it comes to call collecting. If you want to know anything about calls, you ask one of the four, and they can pretty much tell you what you want to know about the call. And if they don't know about the call, they will tell you. I know that Chris, when we were there, Chris, I don't remember the call maker. If it was Swanee River, you had the box call that I didn't even know he made box calls. Is that correct? Yeah, he had a box call there that was made by
Robinson.
what was his name?
Robinson.
Yeah, he I know him from primarily scratch boxers. He was from Gulf Hammond, wasn't he?
Gulf Hammond, correct.
Yeah. And here Chris has a box call. Didn't even know anybody box calls. When it goes back, when y'all get to reading the book, there's parts in the book that refer to how many calls are in people's attics, how many calls are in people's garages, how many calls are in people's possessions. They have no idea what they have. And so this book, as I said in the review that I wrote, this book's going to shed a lot of light on call making, on call makers, and on collectors. If you have anything, if you like turkey hunting at all, or you like collecting, you just like turkey, this is the book for you, because there's so much information in there. It's one of those books that when I started reading it, I could not put it down. And I finally did about 12 o'clock that night, and I had to get up the next morning at 5. But anyway, it was well worth it. It's just a great read, and these are great guys for bringing all this information together and sharing it with all of us. And I think everybody here is appreciative of that. A lot that's not here. A lot of them will get their hands on this book. They'll get it in their possession, and they're going to feel the same way I do about this book. I'm not a big collector, but I have some collectible calls. But these gentlemen have really collectible calls. And they all started out one way or another. They didn't start out just collecting. They started collecting one particular call, and that evolved into other calls, and then that evolved into other calls, and it just keeps on going and going and going. And you get on a call maker, and you want to know exactly what did this guy make? What if, am I missing something? And so forth and so on. I've said enough.
Thanks, Mr. Lamar. So what, I think the four of us were talking, we realized we have, 125 years of collective, collecting experience. And what was amazing, though, is how much we learned doing the book. There were a few conversations where it wasn't, holy cow, or, and again, what everybody added. So, Rick was really the sole call maker among us. And it was always interesting to me to see what he would observe or be able to intuit from looking at something that the rest of us couldn't. Now, Chris just isn't a walking encyclopedia, so I was never surprised to find out but I'll tell you what Chris did. I think you are quite the internet sleuth in terms of all you found, old newspaper articles, obituaries. I mean, we had the internet at our disposal, which was huge. And of course, Danny's collection is just outstanding. Others contribute, Ralph Permar, thank you for the kind introduction you wrote. Howard Harlan did a great foreword. We just had so many people that contributed. Mr. Lamar, you and Bill Jones III did such great reviews for us to be able to preview the book. Some of you, as we think about the history of turkey calls, how do you tell that history? Is there a right way to tell the history? I don't know if there's a right way. We chose a way to do it. What we chose to focus on was what I would call the pre-wild turkey restoration history, which is 1960s and before. Because we get to the 1970s, wild turkeys had made a pretty strong comeback in most of the country. And about every decade, if not every year, could be a full book in itself. And a lot of you have been part of that journey. But we really focused on giving voices to those who didn't have them anymore. And in our book, there's actually only 3 living call makers who we really even focused on, and that was Mr. Billy Bice, Lonnie Sneed Sr., and Harold Knight. Not that there aren't other call makers that are still making calls, which, you know, those 3 have continued to do that. But we really put a focus on people that couldn't tell their stories anymore. It's important that we capture all the stories in this room going forward. So that's a little bit about how we chose to write the book. I'd like for Rick and Chris, for you to add, you know, what other aspects of how we told the story of turkey call history are important for people to know?
So I think, you know, one of the things that, going along with what Brent said, we had several goals set out in mind when we started putting this book together. One, we wanted it to be a very well put together. We call it a coffee table book. We wanted it to be a book you could put on your coffee table, and as your friends come into your house and see that book laying there, they'll say, what is a turkey call? What's that? Because you're all passionate about it, and you can flip through and show some things. But we wanted to also give some of there's always, we get questions, you get questions, how do I know what this is? I don't know what that is. So we wanted some factual, here's what these calls are, and here's what they are about. And so we kind of also organized it, like Brent had said, along with what was going on in our society at the time. So we tied in what happened in pre-1900, and then what happened we did it by decade, 1900 to 1910, what was happening to our country, what was happening legislatively, what was happening to the wild turkey, and then how did that affect how people were making calls? Because those go hand in hand. And we wanted to make sure we told that story. A lot of these old calls, people pick up and say, man, that sounds horrible. No, it sounds like a Jake, because they were hunting fall turkeys. And that's what they wanted to do. So we wanted to bring that story in too.
I think if you will look at our book, the one thing we really emphasized, and here again, this was Danny's ability to help us put the best book possible in print. The pictures in this book are phenomenal. It's like you're holding them in your hand. And that's really important because there's so much detail in current calls, but older calls as well. And a lot of these calls have not been seen outside, say, a major collection like Danny's. You will see all of us have calls in that book. The preponderance of those calls are probably Danny's because his collection is by far the best out there. Jay Cucci, who purchased Earl Mickle, Howard Harlan, and Bill Jones III's entire collections, is a phenomenal collection, but historically does not match what Danny has. Danny has one-of-a-kind pieces that no one else will ever have in their collections because they don't exist anymore. And he was fortunate enough and had the ability to bring those calls into his collection, and he's willing to share them with everybody. But the way he's really sharing with everybody is through this book. And those pictures and the narrative that's associated with those pictures, we hope and are fairly confident, tells the appropriate story. There's more to tell, obviously, but that's where I think it really hits home, is you can see it, and you can see it. The book's in a large enough format that you're not getting out a magnifying glass like I have to do occasionally to see something, but it's right there for you.
Now see, Chris, I thought we put the big print in because when I was in college, if you had bigger words, it meant more pages. You had a 5-page essay.
Oh, I was not aware of that, thank you.
Yeah, it really is dual purpose. It's a story of wild turkey call history, And it's told through words and through photos, and I think that's really the beauty of it. I gave a couple people a hard time when they bought it, because I know they don't read books. That's not what, but they're still going to enjoy it. They're still gonna learn a lot, because they're gonna really be able to focus in on what appeals to them as they look through. I wanna add to what Rick and Chris said, just in terms of the story we told. A couple aspects I think are really important is not just focusing on, let's call it the celebrity call makers, or the ones that, you know, the names get out there quite a bit. It's every bit as important to tell the story of the folk art call. You know, the person that was making the call with what they had, where they were at, you know, you kind of alluded to that, because that's ingenuity. There's so much innovation that was happening at those kind of regional levels, and we even decided to include, we were working through the book and realizing how much material there still was, and we couldn't include everything we wanted to. We added a chapter at the end on regional call development by state, because there were very distinctive things happening there kind of by state. You look at, you know, examples in terms of, I mean, maybe Chris, you want to give, I know you've got examples with the Arkansas duck call makers.
Well, a lot of the duck call makers in Arkansas, and obviously Arkansas used to be, it's not so much anymore, was a very, very prominent duck call area. But many of the duck call makers also made turkey calls, because they hunted for subsistence. It was something that sport, yeah, was great, but they needed to put the food on the table. And those people made some awesome folk art calls. But probably 90% of all the wooden calls are cedar. Very distinct type of call. I can spot an Arkansas call 100 miles away, but I've got a lot of them. So I've spent a lot of time looking at them. But like calls from Virginia, Virginia has a wonderful history of development of turkey calls. But they had some very distinct scratch box calls. And you've all seen the horn and tube call with a hen bone yelper in the end. That's pretty much a Virginia call. If you find one, it probably has its origins back in Virginia or northern North Carolina. But a lot of scratch box came out of, and early scratch boxes out of Florida, because of what were known as sports. People came down from up north to go turkey hunting. And so let's supply them with something to take home as a souvenir. And it was usually a scratch box.
So, getting into like the what people collect and why they collect, they're, like Chris said, the named call makers. I mean, the Lynches, the Turpins, the ones that everybody looks at. That's great, and I look for those too. But probably as much or more, I like looking for the folk art calls. And to me, when I look at one, my mind goes directly to somebody's grandfather sitting underneath an old oak tree that pulls out his pocket knife and starts taking everything out of a block of wood that doesn't sound like a turkey. And those calls to me are the most fascinating. And having done some call making, I look at that and see how they were constructing it and what they were doing and why they were trying to. And those are the most fascinating calls to me. Now, in time, will they be the most valuable calls? Monetarily, maybe not. But to me, absolutely, they're some of the top ones that I like. And it's what everybody wants. But those are big for me. And I know all of us really love the folk art calls. And when some people come around and pull one out, talk about everybody stop what they're doing. We'll just jerk our heads around and have to look at those.
Is Ron Waters here? I didn't see him, but a good example of that, in our book, we had a picture of a call he has here. If you haven't seen it, stop by and ask him to show you his grandfather's call from, you know, basically 100 years ago, and his grandfather was killed turkey hunting. I mean, it's quite a story, and you know, we've got lots of those stories. You know, Bill Jansen, the call this is just a sexy call. I gotta use that word. It's just so cool, the innovation and Missouri, that's close to where I live in Iowa, so I love that Missouri call history, the Eminence area, just rich with that. And then to find out, yeah, you have this other mountain, kind of chain of mountains an hour and a half or so away that had a separate kind of call making innovation going on at the same time, completely different from Eminence,
And he showed us this, a lot of these folk car calls, they're like, man, I like the way he did that, the style, it's got a handle. You know why he did that? And you showed us.
Yeah.
I'm hunting, I hear a turkey. It's function. It's functional. That's what these folks, it was for. Put it in your pocket, you don't have to fumble around for it, grab it, you're calling a turkey.
So another aspect that we had to address with the book is, how do you credit people? Who invented what? I mean, for the most part, we can't know. There are ways that we can identify a significant step in turkey call making history. There's different ways that we can do that. Maybe you want to talk about that?
Well, obviously, the patent process started in the late 1800s. The first known patented call was the Gibson call. But all of us, I'm sure, have seen examples of a Gibson style call because it was heavily advertised around the turn of the century. But there's a lot of knockoffs of that call, people making them in their wood shop behind the house. But lots of calls have an evolution based on a patent. We've seen, I know all of us have seen calls that we would love to make a Gibson out of it. It may be, it may not, because there have to be pre-patented Gibson calls that don't have Simmons hardware or Gibson Bodie or the calligraphy Gibsons, which are very, very highly prized and very valuable. But the evolution, the Drawhorn call from North Carolina, the first scratch box call, we know that those types of calls, the box call, were probably made before patents. But these are people that had the ability or the funds to patent a call to try to capitalize on its marketability. But the Gibson, the Drawhorn, several calls like that were heavily advertised. The Simplex was heavily advertised in national magazines, Field and Stream, Outdoor Life, what have you. Sears had even turkey calls in it. So people could see that style and basically create their own homemade call, because even a Gibson call early on was $7.50. That was a lot of money in 1900. So, why not make my own? I know what a turkey sounds like. If I can make something that sounds like a turkey, I'm gonna damn well do it.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look back at some of these advertisements and stuff, and you see, man, can you believe this BGI was $1.50? Man, I would have bought well, one of the things we did is we actually put what was $1.50 worth in 1900 in today's dollars, and kind of you can compare that. But kind of as Chris alluded to too, when you go into like the 1920s, the Great Depression. I mean, and I remember my grandmother and all talking about it. I mean, a bag of sugar was like gold. Food was scarce, money was scarce. So these people weren't making copies of a Gibson, of this, that, or the other to try and hone in on their market. They knew that would kill a turkey, and they knew they didn't have $7 to pay for it, but they knew they could put dinner on the table for 8 or 10 kids, and that's what they were doing. And that's, it's again, you kind of look back into that time frame of what was going on, and it just makes it even more fascinating.
one of the things that you know was fun as we talked about turkey call evolution was really seeing the problems that call makers were trying to solve. You know, some people, you talked about practicality and language. I mean, when you hunted a turkey had a lot to do with what call you would eventually make. But I just thought it'd be fun to talk about what were some of those problems that we saw being solved, and maybe give some examples of that.
Well, going back, I mean, one of the things that you look at in kind of, I go back to the regional calls, they weren't going and ordering wood on Amazon and having it delivered to the front door. They were looking at what is in their region and their area.
Cedar in Arkansas.
Cedar in Arkansas is very prevalent. And then like in the Roanoke area, river reed, very prevalent. So you're looking, you see kind of, they're using the material. They're not trying to go out and find something, and they're using what they have access to, and they're then making a call for it. And I think that's one thing that really kind of pops out and gives you a lot of clues as to how calls are made. One of the things, we had talked about, and this is what we call an old Virginia style. We know that from some of the advertisements, but if you look in it, it's old cigar boxes is what they made them from, because they were the right size, the right material, and they made the right sound.
Well, I think a great example, and Greg Mills sitting in the back, a great friend of mine and a wonderful collector, purchased a call off of eBay. And we've all bought calls off of eBay, but at times you find a real treasure. Greg found a call from, I'm not sure, Greg, where it came from and as far as where you purchased it from, but the call maker, according to the family that sold the call, was a guy by the name of Knowles. And it's this call right here. And if you look at that call, it's exactly like the patent of J.E. Jackson. Now, whether the family got it wrong, and we found a lot of that. People get things confused over time. And that's one reason we're trying to document things as best we can to make it accurate instead of hearsay. We found so much incorrect hearsay material that we have taken as gospel over the years about a call maker or evolution of a call that has basically turned out to be not true, because we've been able to document it through newspaper articles or various other sources, because the internet, things like Ancestry.com, finding out stuff that we never would have seen. But the Knowles call, the family said that he made this call, but it's made just like a J.E. Jackson. We don't know if Knowles made this call or J.E. Jackson did, but they lived. Jackson moved from North Carolina, Knowles moved from North Carolina to Virginia and lived within 15 miles of J.E. Jackson, who happened to be a black man. We never knew that before. But J.E. Jackson, in his obituary, it's written on his death certificate that he died and his profession was turkey caller. Have you ever seen that? I never have. But we don't know if he made that call or he just patented that call after he saw it. It's interesting juxtaposition for the future of how calls are made. I've got a couple of calls here that are more contemporary in that they were made in the 60s, but you all have heard or know of Frank Cox. Frank's a strange kind of guy, but Frank makes a great call. Well, these calls were made by his uncle in the 60s. And if you look at these calls up close, you see where Frank Cox learned how to make a turkey call. These are superior calls, unbelievable. And they're made out of exotic woods. And the exotic woods really came into focus after the Korean War. Woods and international trade were much, much more prevalent then. And the call makers began to make out of exotic woods at that time. Lynch is a perfect example of that, in that he used mahogany, and his earlier calls were either cedar or walnut. So,
Where was he from?
Frank Cox's uncle,
Doyle was his name?
his name was Weezenant. He was from Mississippi.
Mississippi, yeah.
And I have 8 of his calls that came through Bill Jones. But they originally were Frank's, and they were purchased by Bill. I was fortunate enough to get them from Jay Coochie's estate, who Jay bought, obviously, the Mickle, Jones, and Harlan collections.
All right, so you talked about that guy Greg back there, Greg Mills, you good friend of yours, a guy that keeps bidding me up on stuff. That's what we do. We love the same thing, and I love it. But you know, another example related to Jackson, a call that Greg and I were both bidding on recently was this call that we think is you know, very Jackson-esque, this push pin. What was interesting is it came in a lot with 2 other boxes, which are candle holders, and all those candle holders are these little boxes with the sliding lids where people would store candles. Just an interesting bit, you know, was that the idea where, well, you can have a box like that with a sliding lid. You know, there's the problems that a call like this solves as well is the automatic thing, right? One-handed, a push pin, you know, was providing a one-handed operation, kind of like Lynch was doing the foolproof, you know, trying to make more of an automatic call. And I just think that's neat to see how call makers were trying to make that call that gave the hunter an advantage in some way. Any other examples you guys want to give?
It kind of, I lost my train of thought as you were saying that, because one of the things that we saw when we came up with this, and talking about call makers, and I know it's never happened to anyone here, but occasionally some call makers will badmouth somebody else's. They don't do that, they don't know how, and one of them may have been mentioned along here, but that's not a new revelation. So if you read Henry Davis's book, he talks about different calls, and there's, you know, there's this, there's that, and he said, and there's even some guy in Virginia who makes something that you push on one end, but it sounds terrible, and there's no way it could ever call up a turkey. So it's kind of fun to see what some of those people were thinking back in the day. But that's where my mind went. I kind of skipped over.
We also had that with Jordan.
Yeah,
Earlier.
yeah.
You want to talk about it?
No, you can't. Well, early on in was it Forest and Stream or shooting and fishing?
Well, his earliest was Forest
Well,
and Stream, and then shooting.
Well, he wrote several articles on turkey hunting. And when he wrote those articles, there was a lot of dissension about what he said about turkey hunting. Well, we've pretty well determined that he probably knew a hell of a lot more about turkey hunting than most people at the time, but he had his critics. They had his critics about his calls, his call making, the way he hunted turkey, the whole aspect, that he really didn't know anything about it. And the truth of the matter, he knew a hell of a lot more than we gave him credit for after really doing the research on it. But it goes back into the 1880s when there was dissension back then on turkey calls. Even before any turkey calls were patented or widely advertised, there were still articles in the periodicals or the dailies that came out, and there was always dissension, and there probably always will be.
Well, and it gets in, even goes into the hunting, you know, call it ethics or approach. Some of those old shooting and fishing magazines from the 1880s and 1890s I've been buying up. there's a discussion that could happen today that Jordan was involved with going back and forth with somebody about whether they should be using decoys or not, over 100 years ago. I don't know how many people know that. So one more question, and I think we'll pivot to you all asking some questions. Just want to hear, what one thing would you like to share with people that was the most surprising thing that you learned while we worked on the book?
So, to me, and Chris talked about it a little bit, again, one of my focuses of my collection is the Virginia calls, and knew of the J.E. Jackson and studied the patent and everything about that. But one of the things that we learned as we were going through genealogy, and if you look at the patent, it was not patented in Richmond, Virginia. It was patented in a town just south of there near Petersburg. And you going through and looking up J.E. Jackson or John E. Jackson and trying to find that, and there were some, and they would list who they were, who their parents were, who their children were, where they lived, but you couldn't get any more clarification on it. But we learned that race was Negro. And I thought, this is the first black person who developed a turkey call. And I know there's some others, and I think Brent may touch on that some more about what we did when looking at it. Well, I'll go ahead and jump to it. Sorry, I read ahead. But one of the things we did when we were doing this, there's a lot of things, as we've talked about, we thought were reality, but when we started doing research, we really weren't sure. We didn't make any assumptions or anything that we thought were true unless we had some documented evidence that said this is what happened and how happened and where else. So some of the things that people have assumed may be, we will mention it's thought to be this, but we don't come out and say this is the way it was. But we have documented evidence that that is the first African American that made calls back in that time, a patented call, and then where he moved and those kind of things. And that was interesting to me, again, looking at a region I was familiar with and that history.
Just to follow up, the Jackson thing was very enlightening. And we also found out, and Rick actually has one, that Jackson's wife, after he died, still made turkey calls and stamped it with her name. Susie or?
Sousa.
Sousa Jackson. But all of that is very enlightening, but a lot of things that we thought were true were not so accurate, that we probably wouldn't been able to come up with 25, 30 years ago. The internet is so much more enlightening than we used to have. There's one individual that had a call that wanted to go into the book. He said it was a G.D. Kinney box call. And I don't know how many of you in here are duck call collectors or know a lot about antique duck calls. But G.D. Kinney was a very well-respected duck call maker out of Memphis, Tennessee. He's a contemporary of Turpin, contemporary of Denison. But he was a guide at the Five Lakes Club over in Hughes, Arkansas, which is really right across the river from Memphis. But he was really known for making duck calls. He made a few crow calls. I'm fortunate enough to have one. We only know of about 6. But his duck calls and his crow calls are some of the finest craftsmanship you will ever see. And this was back in the 20s. And this individual had what he said was a G.D. Kinney box call. We know G.D. Kinney made turkey calls because there's a 1931 article in the Memphis Commercial Appeal that, here again, the internet's helped us, that said that he was a renowned duck, turkey, and crow call maker. To this day, the family has never had a G.D. Kinney box call, or turkey call of any shape, manner, or form. But this individual said he had it, and I said, well, how do you know it's a G.D. Kinney? We don't have a name on it, family can't verify it. How do you know? He said, oh, easy. It came with a G.D. Kinney crow call. How do you make that stretch? Well, it has to be. It was with a G.D. Kinney crow call, so it's got to be his turkey call. Well, we obviously know that can't be a firm identification for a call. We didn't put it in, so.
One more thing, and I'm gonna turn this to you. Tom Turpin was known for two things. One was, and I'm gonna say, a game call maker. What was the other thing that he was known for?
Question to the audience.
This is to the audience. So I heard toy maker or something?
Yeah.
That's not what I'm thinking of.
No. A call maker buyer.
That's not what I'm thinking of.
All collector.
It's not what I'm thinking of.
You're stumped.
Send
You'll
it.
never know.
But
So the other thing that he was known for, he was one of the two involved in the last duel in Arkansas.
And he actually killed a man.
And he killed a man. The last legal duel. These are, and I'll tell you, that's one of the things we never knew when we started researching this. So we learned a lot. But the thing of it is, it kind of goes back to Danny's passion. If we didn't start now, this stuff would be lost. Completely lost.
Yeah, the duel actually happened across the border, I think, in Arkansas, is that right? And where he was a guide at a game club, and we've got the story in the book. It's absolutely unbelievable. Thanks to Steve Turpin for allowing us to break that news. As we were working on the book, Steve had said, this is like a family legend. Like Tom Turpin was in the last duel in Memphis, and he found an article from 75, an article that had been reprinted 75 years after it had happened in a newspaper that gave all the details. And so that's one of the things that left an impression on me too, is we're telling a more, what's a good book without a murder story, right? But I mean, you give them some humanity to people to tell the full story, and it's a great story. He seemed to be justified in what happened. Well, the thing that I walked away with too was buyer beware. So as collectors, whether the example Chris gave or whatever, there's a lot of temptation to want to believe that what you're holding in your hand is, the genuine thing, or sometimes it's, people have ulterior motives. Like anybody that picks up a call that looks like a Tom Turpin call and says it's a Tom Turpin call, be careful, right? Know who you're buying from, what provenance is and how to back that up. And mysteries are great things too. We don't have to, not everything has to be solved for it to be a wonderful call. Having said that, we'd like to take some questions from you all.
What are the earliest known calls that you've got in American history, and are all of your calls from America? Did they not come from Europe with settlers that came over?
Well,
Question.
yeah, very good question. In Howard Harlan's book, which we've got some of his books that we bought his remaining inventory, he kind of gives a little bit of history of game calls. They 12,000 years ago, they were using whistles to scare ducks off marshes and shoot them. And, there's most of the turkey call history, all the turkey call history is American. This is where the bird's native to. And the Native Americans were very crafty in terms of how they hunted turkeys. And we've got lots of photos in the book of Native American calls from 5700 BC forward. Even, bones that were found, in situ, put together, which even the archaeologists that found them said these are believed to be wild turkey calls. So that's really fascinating. And Danny Ellis, has purchased some that even have some decorative markings on it, which, I thought was really fascinating. We've got pictures of those that, you don't often think about, bones could be repurposed by Native Americans to be used a lot of things, but when you see an etching on one, that's pretty darn special.
Well, I think obviously the Native American is the first known, or at least so far, known turkey calls. And it progressed from there, but we have what we think are scratch boxes, box calls, even yelpers that predate any of the patented information starting in 1897. We even have calls that have dates. Now, we can't verify those dates weren't put on in 1919 or 1990 for that matter. But we have calls dating back to 1850 with that date scratched on the calls, but there's no way to verify that. But they definitely have age. Duck call makers, and I keep going back to duck call makers because they really are integral to game call manufacture. Calls are now being faked, both turkey and duck calls, and they have great ways of aging that wood. But it has a smell and a patina that's really, really difficult to recreate. But all of the turkey calls that we're dealing with, to our knowledge, came out of the United States. Now, there's a call that was made in the 60s called the Ideal Turkey Call, made in Japan. I don't doubt that calls have been made overseas, but why would someone go to the trouble to do that for a very limited market, for a very nominal price, when they did not have them as a contemporary call, turkey or game to be hunting at that time?
Yeah, along those lines, one of the difficulties of some of the earliest calls, some of them were blades of grass or blades of greenbrier blown between fingers. So, but along the same thing, a lot of those early calls were something that was readily available, easy to use. And I think of the Roanoke River style, which is one of the ones we portrayed in the limited edition book. Those calls were made out of something readily available, and if you look at the way it's even described, you could be out in the woods, hear a turkey, and cut yourself a piece of river cane of different sizes, put them together, a piece of scissors that hollowed out a piece of alder. These weren't made to be family heirlooms. They were made for a specific purpose. I don't want to say one and done, but they weren't made for year over year. They were made for what's available, what can I use that'll kill a turkey.
Last thing I would say is the human voice was probably the first thing used to call in a turkey, and was done pretty well. We've even got some stories in the book that if you want to get it and read that talk about how the Native Americans even used that to lure in settlers. We've got some pretty interesting stories about how, people love turkey hunting so much that they died doing it. Other questions? Up here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You too, brother.
I'm curious, when did you see the earliest evidence of a mouth diaphragm call? And in the course of that evolution, did you ever come across a gentleman by the name of Joe Messenger?
The earliest patented diaphragm is 1923, Henry Bridges. That doesn't mean he's the first one that ever made one. In fact, at the same time he was doing that, there was a gentleman from Mississippi that was also, pioneering, let's call it a mouth call, in a way that we might think about it. I'm not familiar with Messenger. Anything either of you want to add?
I would say that there were also evidence of calls being made in New Orleans, Mobile. It seems to be a southern function, but Bridges obviously was one of the founders of the Woodmont Club in Maryland. He was a very, very prominent, wealthy businessman. His ideal turkey hunt was raising a turkey, keeping it in a pen, releasing it, and going hunting. Whether he had the inclination to do a mouth call or just picked it up and had the money to patent it, we don't know. But the first use of mouth is, like Rick said, using a reed or a piece of grass between your fingers.
Other questions? Take a couple more. Everybody's ready to go watch football?
I got one more. When did you start seeing, if you did, the notion of decorating the calls to surface?
Simon Everett, probably. Well, Danny Ellis has absolutely fabulous calls by Simon Everett. Simon Everett published a book in 1924.
Yes.
But he has some absolutely beautiful decorated calls. 28. But we
What kind of
have,
calls were they?
box call.
Gotcha.
But we have examples of calligraphy calls by Gibson. We have not been able to determine exactly when those calls were made. They're not dated. There was a rumor we were not able to verify, so we did not publish it as being the way these calls, or when these calls were done. But it was thought that Gibson moved from Dardanelle, Arkansas to Little Rock to go into a nursing home. Well, he died in 1931. Well, the December 1930 census said he was still living at home in Little Rock. So, but it was thought that he calligraphied those calls when he was in a nursing home. We have no idea if that's true or not. He could have been calligraphing those calls prior to patenting the calls. We don't know.
Along those, some of that decorative were in blowing horns, and we've seen numerous examples of that. And actually, Simon Everett, he had the most beautiful blowing horn that Danny has. That's how we were able to tie that to a box call. That, and I've seen a number of those, and it kind of goes back to in those days, turkey hunting a lot was with dogs back then. It was in the fall, it was with dogs. So things were, you got to look at what was happening in that period.
And I would just quickly add, if you know, we had somebody stop by the booth today and show us a picture of a powder flask that could have been from the 1700s that had wild turkeys, you know, on it. That art was specifically, the art might not have been on the call, but people have always been, you know, looking for a way to give an image to what they love. Marvin?
Weren't some of Lynch's very, very early homewoods decorated? The very, very earliest, before.
Well, the decoration he traditionally used, he'd put a turkey on the cover and he'd put a gentleman with a shotgun on the call. This particular call has both of those. And all the homewoods I've seen have had very similar decoration. But he always signed his homewood calls, which his later calls, obviously, the people that made stamps in Birmingham were very happy to have him as a customer, because he didn't sign many calls once he went to the Birmingham address.
Weren't they earlier than the Simon Everett call?
Oh, no, no. Everett was making calls in the 20s. And to our knowledge, and I spoke, it's been years ago, to his nephew, and he claimed that he made his first call in 1938, Lynch.
Well, okay, folks, thank you. Really appreciate your attention. I just want to say, you know, I think that this group of call makers and collectors is really significant in terms of what we can pool our time and talent to continue to learn. You know, we don't know it all, that's for darn sure. We know how much we don't know, so we'd love your help to keep on turning up calls, solving mysteries, and if you find something interesting, please share it with us.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
This is actually
That's beautiful. How many I got there?
I can make